All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the holiday edition of our work group. Just as a reminder, I am recording this. I don't think I've got any housekeeping before we kick things off. Anybody have any anything before we start?
Yeah, Judge, I did have one kind of procedural question.
Sure.
And maybe I guess two, but they may be interconnected. I saw you sent out kind of the summary of kind of positions so far in box 1 and 2, and some parties have provided comments and edit. So just asking for clarification, are you looking for edits and comments from the parties, and if so, by when?
I am not. I know a lot of the things Mr. Bartlett added would be included in the narrative portion of it, which would precede the recommendation. So, if I've got something completely wrong, if PHI is all excited about the data platform that Ron had suggested, and I got that wrong, you guys change your mind, let me know. But otherwise, I'm not looking for comments. That was more or less just to hopefully provide a better picture for everyone as to where we've been so far, what we've decided and haven't decided, and some items that are outstanding.
Gotcha. And I guess a second piece of that, I know the interim report is due January 2nd or 12th.
It's the 12th.
Is just understanding that for me, is the working group, will we see that prior to the filing, or?
Absolutely. And my intent on that is literally just to provide a status. It'll say how many times we meet, about how many folks have attended the meetings, and I will send that out probably maybe after this meeting, or maybe next week. You guys will have plenty of time to take a look at it, but I don't intend on getting into any of the meat that we've discussed so far.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification.
No problem. Anybody else? Oh, no problem, Al. All right. Jacob, thanks for submitting those comments. And with that, why don't we get moving? All right. I noted the joint utilities were good with the amended demand flexibility definition, right? So that's good. Let's see. One thing I didn't see in your comments, and I'm just kind of ticking these down as I have them, and my guess is maybe there wasn't time. In response to, I think it was OPC, Jorge had discussed how the utilities are going to kind of hold customers' feet to the fire in the event that they don't show up when they're called. Did you guys have anything on that, or is it not?
Yeah, that's one that we'll just need more time to kind of discuss internally to be able to present. It's still on our to-do list, but just time-wise wasn't able to turn it around for this week.
All right. Fair enough. And again, we're only going till noon today because I know there's another work group, and I certainly don't want to deprive you of having two work groups in one day. And my guess is the same for the impact and / modeling on inverters. Is that something that you guys are following up on?
Yeah, I think that was still on the to-do list. Just
okay.
Turning it
all right. Well, we're ticking things off. We'll be out here earlier. All right. One thing you noted disagreement with was Mr. Verchinsky's proposed kind of a new box entitled Forecast Models / Assumptions / Validation. You got any?
Yeah, I think our main thought there was most of that is already captured in existing boxes within Jade, with the data being already captured, I think, in box 1, and then our understanding of the 2 forecast boxes would essentially capture that methodology. And so since that's already captured kind of within the Jade process, not necessarily feeling an additional box was necessary.
Okay. All right. Mr. Verchinsky, this was your baby, so to speak.
Yeah, basically my reason for putting it in was that there was so much of an emphasis that the utilities were placing on forecasts, and their conclusion that we really don't know what forecast methodology to use. So I thought that that needed to be dealt with separately instead of subsumed in those boxes. You know, if the utilities are simpatico with knowing what the forecasting models are going to be within those boxes, then I would be okay with that. But I'm not sure that that's the case. You know, where are you coming from, Jacob?
I think, obviously we want to make sure we're differentiating between current state and future state, right? And obviously a lot of what we're discussing within the JADE process map is around that future state. And I think as we outlined in our comments from the previous time, I think we have kind of an understanding and kind of approach of where we want to go with that future state, which would incorporate many of those kind of methodologies for forecasting many of the things in that box. So I think as we look towards viewing this as a future state kind of discussion, I think a lot of that would be captured there by the utilities.
But my question is, do you have that modeling already in hand, or does that need to be discussed? Because we really haven't discussed that within those boxes. And from my standpoint, it's critical in terms of where we're going with planning.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, are you looking for the working group to delve deeper into the specific methodologies used?
At some point, that's going to have to be done.
I think, as we look at kind of the focus of the working group, obviously it's identifying those DSP best practices and as well as identifying where the JADE process map fits within, the state of Maryland, and obviously all the work around transparency in the state CSNA goals. And so I think, obviously within kind of defining specific methodologies, I think, as the order outlined, there, needs to remain flexibility for the utilities within that. And so I think, trying to be prescriptive around, methodologies is kind of going a little counter to the order's ideals around maintaining that utility flexibility, within parts of the space and that those differences within the utilities.
But you are agreeing with me, I think, that forecasting and models are going to be a driver of the DSP.
Yes, and I think they're captured in box 3 and 4.
Okay, well,
Mr. Verchinsky, you're just looking, it sounds like you're looking for like specifics, like PHI is going to use model X, Y, and Z. Is that fair or no?
no, I was,
Okay.
I was not looking for that specificity. What I was looking for was that this is going to be critical to what happens over time, and that would be a necessary part of the DSP itself.
Okay. All right. And Jacob, you agree with that concept? Sounds like generally?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we agree that, the methodologies for forecasting will be an important part of the future, DSP process.
Okay. Right.
Okay, well, I'm good if people understand that that is a part of that box, and from my standpoint, it's a critical issue.
Okay. We can always throw in a footnote or something like that to kind of foot stomp the importance of that as well.
Okay, I'm good.
And sir, if we get to a point where you're not satisfied with what we've covered later, please feel free to revisit this if you wish to. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. On this point, I was thinking ahead to what we're going to specify as required in the plan, and also the criteria for viewing the plan, and when we get to reporting. All of that, I think, is down the road a bit. I would assume that the utilities would state what methodology they're using when they make their DER forecast. That would just be a simple part of what they present when they actually present their plans, and hopefully even when it's discussed beforehand with stakeholders. I do think it's important. I didn't think we had to define specific methodologies here, but rather that would be something the utilities would get to choose, and they would just simply say what they were using.
All right, thank you, sir. Okay. All right. All right, so Jacob, does it sound like, at least from the joint utilities perspective, that the models and methodologies and things like that would be made, be disclosed, made, apparent to all the stakeholders who want to participate in the process?
Yeah, I think part of the kind of long-term analysis that we had proposed, step 2 was talking about inputs and assumptions and methodologies. I believe I don't have the document pulled up, but I think there was an incorporation of that discussion within it.
All right. Okay. No. All right. I appreciate you confirming that. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Sounds like we kind of agree on it, at least for now. Yes, sir. Jorge.
Yeah, no, yeah. Thank you so much, folks. We may want to, we hear the utilities. We don't want to be prescriptive, but there gotta be some level of specificity, right, in regards to the potential adoption of DR functions, right, in the forecast. So, I'm going to throw us one specific example. So, when you're bringing DER into the plan, is because the assumption is that this DER is going to be used for something, right? So we would like to see, what the utilities are expecting to use this DER for, right? For example, this DER is going to be providing XYZ grid support service, or this DER is going to be to do peak demand reduction. It's important, for the stakeholders to understand what it is that what functions are bringing into the planning. And this ties up again into what it is that the utility is going to do to ensure that when these assets are called in, they're going to show up. So even though we don't want to be prescriptive, but we need to understand, what are those functions that they're bringing into the planning that they're going to be deploying into the operations. So just have that in the back of your mind. And another thing, if possible, so in regards to the modeling of the smart inverter functionalities, I don't know, Jacob, if I kind of, it was maybe lukewarm, but the expectation is that you're going to provide to the group, right, how it is that you're going to bring these functionalities into the planning process, correct?
I think if I recall, the action item was the utilities we're going to take back to discuss the smart inverter. Like I said, I'm not the expert on it, so I can't commit to what specifically within that, but we can take that back to the team to discuss, with the group.
Right, and what it is that we should be expecting from you folks. I mean, because what we're seeking is specifically is how it is that you're modeling these capabilities, right? That, to our understanding, they're not being modeled right now.
Well, I believe the smart inverter settings, at least the initial ones, don't go into play until next year anyway, correct?
Right, but this is about planning, right? So we need to plan ahead. So what we're looking is for how is that framework? How is that going to evolve over time, knowing that there's a timeline that is explicit, right? So just trying to figure it out what it is that you're planning to show to the group in regards to ensuring that these functionalities are taken into account.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm by no means the expert on smart inverters, so I can take that question back. And obviously, depending on what I hear from the team, that may shape kind of what that response is going to look like. I can't commit right now specifically to what that answer is going to look like because I just don't know. So that's something that we'll take back to the team to discuss.
Okay, so how we're gonna call that action item? I don't know, Josh. I just want to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks. Maybe.
No, I've got a kind of a list of things we need to follow up on, and I'm adding that as well as the your question from last week in terms of how they're holding DER customers' feet to the fire in the event they don't show up.
Right.
And you may have logged on maybe a minute or two after Jacob had indicated he was going to follow up on that, as well as the impact and modeling of the inverters. So that's definitely on their radar as well as mine.
Great, thank you.
Sure. And again, I appreciate you raising it again, just so it doesn't fall off our radar. So in case, the more people we have, with their finger on the pulse of items we need to follow up on, the better. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you. All right. So more to come on that. Anybody else on this particular issue? Yes, Eli. Good morning.
Yeah, thanks, Judge, and appreciate this conversation. Just a quick comment to maybe try to wrap a bow around it a little bit. I think what we're ultimately hearing from Jorge and Paul and Al is that there's a desire for an understanding from work group members to just have, whether it be written or presented or however it might be done, to have something that clearly walks through what the utilities methodology is in regard to forecasting, how that methodology will evolve over time, how that methodology will incorporate what Jorge's pointing out in smart inverter settings, what Paul pointed out in terms of various elements of different DER forecasting pieces. And so I think the idea is to get some type of presentation, memo, whatever it might be, detailing methodology, key assumptions, inputs, and then what that looks like today and how that realistically can evolve over time. I also think that will end up addressing several of OPC's comments on Jade boxes 3 and 4. So if that's something we're able to get from the utilities, I just wanted to hopefully try to clarify at least how I'm interpreting what it is kind of we're looking for. But I see Jorge and Al have raised hands, so maybe there's some recharacterization of what I just said that needs to happen.
All right, we got Jorge and then Al. Thank you, Eli. Jorge, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I lower my hand. Sorry about that.
Al.
Yeah, thanks. Just following up on what Eli said. I mean, I think it is. These are things that we do want to work through as a working group. To my mind, the most important thing is what detail will be included in the plan that will help the commission evaluate the plan. So that's. I think that's where we want to really end up. What is most helpful to help let the commission understand how the plan is being developed, so that they can reflect on that when they look at it. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, maybe just to respond to that, I definitely agree with Al that is something that needs to be incorporated within the plan itself. I do want to add that I think it would be really helpful for that to be presented to the work group as well, because that would allow us to develop a more granular understanding of maybe where the gaps are in current forecasting. And, that would also allow work group members to provide feedback on what assumptions are reasonable. And maybe those are things that we can ultimately include as recommendations in the April report. And so definitely agree with Al. I think that is something that will need to be in the plan, but I do also see value in presenting forecasting methodology, assumptions, and inputs to the work group as well in the near term, because I think, this is the key underlying component, or one of the key underlying components to just reforming the way distribution planning is done. Forecasts need to be incorporated into the process. It hasn't been done historically. And so I think work group members just need a clear understanding of how that's going to be done, so that we can develop recommendations around that. And then eventually I totally agree it should be included within the plans too.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jorge.
Again, I lower my hand. I don't know why it keeps showing up.
Okay, that's all right. Nervous tick. All right, Jacob.
Yeah, I think in kind of talking through where the group's kind of going right now, I think one, discussion around kind of presenting again current forecasting methodologies. There's entirely phase one. Even in our comments for the most recent boxes, we listed out kind of what that current methodology is. We've provided, again, the presentations from phase one. I think kind of walking through current processes again, I think, given our time constraint within the working group, I think is an unnecessary step. In terms of the beginning to define the methodologies, for the future, I think, as we've kind of mentioned before, really, this is an in-progress development, right? This is a crawl, walk, run kind of, working through it and developing this. It takes time, right? It takes time to implement these things. And so in terms of within the scope of this phase of the working group, and by April 30th, trying to sit here and present on specific methodologies and approaches for those future views, I don't think is in the best position. I think we've outlined where we're interested in going in terms of that future forecasting, and I think many of the comments from previously have aligned with kind of where we're trying to go. And so I think for the scope of this working group, it's really about defining the process and the overall kind of DSP practices, and not necessarily trying to get into the weeds of specific methodologies and inputs, trying to define them here today.
Right. But well, first, I'm sure Eric would be happy to use his walk, jog, run, or crawl, walk, run phrase. But I get what you're saying. But do you see you being the joint utilities as being able to provide OPC with the kind of detail they're looking for, as maybe not like, okay, we're going to do this specific model, we're going to make these specific assumptions and have all that by April 30th, but as part of the process moving forward, is that something that PHI is going to be willing to give presentations as part of the transparency aspect?
In terms of like the assumptions, inputs, and everything?
Yeah, the kind of the things that Eli was talking about, either something to provide the stakeholders with an understanding of what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you're forecasting, and all the bells and whistles. It sounds like that's what you're at least anticipating, but
yeah, I mean, I think I would say, at least right now, broadly, yes. And obviously, in our long-term analysis, there are steps where we want to talk with stakeholders and present with stakeholders and align with stakeholders on those inputs and assumptions.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think even beyond this working group, there would be spots where those discussions with stakeholders, who many of them will be people from this working group, would be able to kind of hear that work and everything.
Right. And obviously there'll be more to follow on the transparency subgroup, right? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Eli, before I hit some other folks, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think that generally makes sense. I think if stakeholders can be involved in the long-term process, that will be, that's obviously a necessary component. What I think I would admittedly need to look back on, because it's been a minute since those phase one presentations, right? Those are probably about a year and a half stale at this point. But happy to go back and look through those phase one presentations to try to remember exactly what it was that was discussed in there. Off the bat, I don't know if I'm recalling a discussion of key assumptions. And I think the key assumptions that are being used in the forecasting models are going to be massive drivers of what the ultimate distribution plans look like. And so we're happy to take the action item of going back to review the phase one presentations that were provided, but I don't know that they got to that level of detail. And I think one of the recommendations that we would be likely looking for this work group report to make in April is an explicit path forward that seeks to modernize methodologies and assumptions and incorporates stakeholder transparency and review within those. So as long as that can ultimately be an explicit recommendation of the work group in April, I think that's probably something we can get behind. But again, I do want to go back and kind of review what was discussed in phase one, because I don't remember it being particularly robust, if I'm recalling correctly. It's been like a year and a half. I don't remember those slides that well. But I do think ultimately, if we can, as a work group, lay out an explicit like stakeholder transparency process and process by where stakeholders can advise on assumptions and utilities incorporate that feedback, and modify their assumptions based on stakeholder feedback, then that's the ultimate end goal of I think, and that also accomplishes the PSC's goal of transparency and stakeholder involvement.
And Jacob's nodding his head, so I'm going to take that at least as agreement with some or most of what you said. So yeah, he's a
Yeah,
great.
and I think that's what we laid out, and obviously the subgroup will talk further. I know, Eli, you reached out to participate in that, and so the subgroup will work further to define that, so that way that is, defined as a DSP practice, within the working group report in April.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Al, and then Tim.
Yeah, thanks. So I have reviewed the phase one slides, and distinctly recall, and it was very impressive at the time, that most of the presentations from the utilities specifically said we do not have DER forecasting methodologies and we do not have EV forecasting methodologies. The only one that did was PEPCO, and theirs was actually, they may have verbally mentioned the method that they were using, but the presentation basically said that the forecast was limited by the existing circuit capacity, and so that's not where we're going to end up going. So, but my main point is that I think it's our job as the working group. I'm not so. I do need. We want stakeholders to have appropriate involvement, but I'm really focused on what we want the commission to have as information when they review these plans, and when they monitor them, and so. I think the kind of things that Eli was talking about, I thought it was clearer, and it's gotten a little muddy. I think that our job is really to identify the categories of information that would be included in the plan, so that we can see what methodology was used for projecting DERs, and as Jorge pointed out, and what functionalities were included as well. Same thing for EVs. In the chat, there's mention of a new dynamic forecasting model for weather and load. And so these things may evolve, but I think it's important that as the process goes forward, there be clarity about how these projections are being realized. So that may change over time, but I think that it's an important dimension for both stakeholders and most importantly, the commission to evaluate the plans. And that's all I'm pushing for.
All right. Thank you, sir. Tim.
Yeah, I want to just give a little bit more, maybe clarity on, I think, my perspective on this for what we're, I think, trying to do here. And kind of pulling off what Eli had said, I think there is some emphasis on hearing, Jacob, what you just said of like, there's been some amount of like, already some presentation, and there's some understanding of what the utilities are currently doing. I think I would emphasize more towards what's going to happen. And I think that's why, IBC gave our actions to bridge the gap, because we're interested in, I think, what are the next steps here? I mean, I think we've all agreed here that we're defining kind of the end goal of like what DSP should be, DSP should become. But I think if we're going to talk to what the end state and goal is of DSP in Maryland, I think we absolutely need to also define how you get there. And so that's why we tried to frame our comments with this idea of not only what is the future state, but also what are these actions to bridge the gap, and recognizing limitations on what we can, how deep and how in the weeds we can get on this. I think it is important that this group comes to an agreement on whatever it can as to what are the next steps, like what are those walk steps that get you to run. If we're interested in eventually being able to have this full DER forecasting, capability with lots of granularity. What are the things that need to happen next in order to achieve that? And talking through, you know, maybe not exact timelines for each utility, but kind of like whether or not those are feasible next steps.
All right. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to just add, I mean, I think we had submitted in our comments, you know, this week. I don't think we entirely disagree with the idea of talking through next steps and what that looks like. I think, you know, our comments were primarily, I think that's best suited once we've kind of outlined the process and the future state, right? We have two subgroups going with metrics and engagement. And so some of what comes from them may influence how we define the next steps within even these specific boxes. So I think discussions of kind of outlining what's those next steps, how do we start to bridge those gaps, is best suited kind of once we've defined the overall process, what that future kind of looks like. And then, you know, once we have that kind of entire view working to discuss kind of what bridging that gap looks like. You know, but I agree, Tim, I think, both of us are generally aligned in what that future looks like, at least for boxes 3 and 4. So, you know, I think we're very much in agreement of where we're working towards.
Okay. And yeah, so I think that the disagreement here, this, you know, and it might be slight, but I would see those pieces as being just as critical as the future and state in this, like in our reporting. Like it almost doesn't help us to say this is something that we want to achieve 10 years down the road if we can't also list some kind of next steps to get there.
Yeah, I agree. I just think we should revisit that once we have the, you know, future essentially defined, and then go through and say what are those steps then to get there, once we have kind of the fuller picture.
Eli, you look concerned.
I'm trying to think of the best, you know, I guess I'm ultimately just trying to figure out exactly what happens in the April report and then what happens thereafter. And when, you know, I definitely understand the idea that this work group in this current stage might not particularly have the bandwidth to tackle detailed assumptions and inputs within a forecasting methodology. That is admittedly, you know, an in the weeds discussion. However, that is the exact type of discussion that I do think this, you know, that at least the intent of this work group should, you know, aim to get to, because it's just really going to be such a key underlying component of how DSP moves forward in the state. And so I don't have any particular response right now, and I think we just kind of need to see how things play out over the coming months and ultimately how the report develops. But I'm just inclined to think that one of the key recommendations in the report that you know we would likely be pushing for is that explicit process that I already referred to it before, so I'm not going to, you know, beat a dead horse, but you know, just the explicit opportunity for stakeholders to get involved in the development and review and refinement of those methodologies and assumptions and inputs. And I think we just kind of need to lay out that process. I think, you know, the work group is charged with developing, and I think Jacob said this, DSP best practices, and developing reasonable forecast assumptions and methodologies is a key DSP best practice, I would argue. And so I do think this work group needs to eventually get there, whether it's in this current phase, you know, prior to the April report, or, you know, we're obviously going to be tasked with, you know, getting to regulations there like after the April report. So perhaps it can fit within that. But I think at some point, sometime, there is going to need to be some, you know, discussion and alignment and refinement of that process.
Okay, sounds good. And sounds like everybody's kind of on the same page. Hopefully, you know, the transparency subgroup that Jacob's setting out on will be fruitful. And, you know, to the extent it's not, hopefully there'll be, there's got to be some agreement in there somewhere, I'm sure. Now, whether or not you guys come to a full agreement on involvement, that remains to be seen, obviously, but I'm sure there'll be something we can agree on there. In terms of long-term, I think we're good on that. Well, we're good on that, at least the understanding. Jacob, and one of the other items that you're going to follow up on, and I realize you may have to put this on your to-do list, was utilities were going to think about stakeholder involvement in the midterm plans. Is that another kind of follow-up for you guys?
Yeah, that's one we don't have anything specific yet.
Okay.
I thought that would also be able to be incorporated in the subgroup discussion.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And I know one of the things Eli had brought up, I think it was last week or the week or the meeting before, was in terms of the short term, maybe not necessarily involvement in that, but maybe kind of like a after action report or results that come from your shorter term plans. If you could also put that on your to-do list. It's probably more of a debriefing than anything, but
Okay.
is that kind of what you were thinking, Eli? I know you didn't use those exact words.
Yeah, no, Judge, you characterized it pretty well. I think
Okay.
the general gist was, we recognize that there is somewhat limited, not completely limited, but somewhat limited input and feedback that can realistically provided within like the short-term operational stage, we'll call it, like the very near-term planning, what's going to happen within the next year or so. So there is limited ability to like truly modify what's going to be happening there, but beyond that very near-term stage, I think is where stakeholders will be able to have a very significant role. So yeah, I think that's pretty well characterized.
Great. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else on these topics? And again, hopefully the transportation, I keep calling that, the transparency subgroup will, iron a lot of this stuff out. All right. In terms of OPC's comments, Jacob, their actions to bridge the gap that were in their 1130 comments, a lot of it looks like I'm sorry, the joint utilities are, I don't want to say, well, you're kind of kicking the can down the road on those specific issues. Is that, you want to, as they'll be hit later in the process, is that the thought behind
Yeah,
those?
like I had said before, Judge, I think in terms of defining specific actions, I think it's worth defining the entire process first, and then revisiting what those actions are, just because there may be overlap, there may be combined. Once we kind of see the bigger picture, I think those actions can be kind of more clearly defined without, taking any unnecessary missteps or anything. So especially with two subgroups already kind of in motion, I think it would be, best suited to have that discussion once the full kind of process is outlined.
Jacob, could I follow up on that? So you say you would want to kind of hit on these core issues or core actions to bridge the gap related to DER forecasts once the overarching process has been determined. Can you, and feel free to recharacterize that, but can you clarify exactly what you mean when you say once the process has been determined? What specifically are you referring to when you say the process? When are you referring to? I think what I'm trying to understand ultimately is, when would the Exelon utilities envision actually being able to address OPC's recommendations? Is that something that would be happening within this phase of the work group prior to the April report? Is that what you're getting at? Or this would be following the April report? Just any additional color I think will help.
Yeah, I think to me, it would be after we've gone through the entire JADE roadmap and kind of outlined and defined what that kind of future view of DSP is within Maryland. So I would expect that would be within the time frame of this working group. Obviously, if we run into time constraints, that's obviously a potential thing, and it may have to be a follow-up discussion, and not trying to avoid the discussion, but just recognizing time constraints. But I would see that as after we've gone through the JADE process map, defined how we view that and aligned on that, and then having that discussion around, okay, how do we then start to move towards that vision that is basically outlined for DSP.
Okay.
I would expect that to be before the working group report, and that's a discussion there, but, you know.
Okay. Yeah, I think, look, as long as, so what I think the April work group report needs to achieve in part is, you know, clear, actionable recommendations around all of the various aspects of DER forecasting that we kind of put in those comments. If the April report kind of fails to actually recommend specific changes to forecasting process, that means we'll be behind the ball in terms of developing COMAR regulations related to the forecasting process. And that is the ultimate, you know, end goal explicitly required by the commission of this work group. And so I think we would argue that the forecasting piece is probably maybe the single most important element, or that along with really like the stakeholder involvement piece are probably the two most important elements underlying, you know, a reformed, modernized DSP process. And as long as we're able to get to those, great. But I think we absolutely need to get to those here. And if that means that, you know, if what you're effectively saying is that like we've talked through boxes 3 and 4 to the fullest extent we can at this stage, and we need to come back to them after we align on the rest of the process, then I think we should march towards aligning on the rest of the process ASAP, so that we can, in other words, you know, maybe move on to the next boxes at our next meeting, such that we can get through and come back to these DER forecasting recommendations, because they will be core elements for what we believe needs to be in the April report.
All right, you're very stoic, Jacob.
I mean, I guess I don't entirely, you know, disagree. Obviously, we've outlined, you know, what the Exelon Utilities view as the future for forecasting for boxes 3 and 4. It's very much aligned with what OPC views for that future of forecasting. And so, you know, I think there's already very much alignment in where we're trying to go. And so I would think, you know, there will be general alignment there, just recognizing that, you know, if things come out of the metrics group that influence this, or come out of this, you know, the engagement group that influence some of these discussions, or future boxes, I think it's worth incorporating those into what those, you know, potential changes are. Obviously, you know, we're recommending DSP practices, which is, I would think, largely influenced around kind of the view of the future, right? And what those future DSP practices look like. And then, you know, focusing on how do we close, you know, how do we, you know, work towards accomplishing that.
And Jacob, when you say the utilities have kind of explained what their future vision is for the forecasting process, which are you referring to a specific presentation or set of comments?
So our comments from prior to the previous meeting, you know, we had outlined for both DER and load forecasting, both current practice as well as the joint utilities vision for the future forecasting processes. And I think OPC replied to them, you know, saying that they were in general agreement with some questions around, I think it was around EVs. We had EVs listed as load, you know, we discussed last meeting and how it's kind of both. So that's the document I'm referring to.
Okay.
Might be the one filed on the 8th, December 8th.
December 8th. Okay. Cool.
Those were the initial comments on boxes 3 and 4.
Okay.
And then they submitted reply comments on the 12th. But my guess is, Jacob, you're probably referring to the one on the 8th.
Yep.
All right. Okay. All right. Do you have those, Eli? You want me to shoot them to you?
Yeah, no, I see them. I was
Okay.
searching my inbox for emails from Jacob, but these came from Jaquita Fowler. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right. All right. So it sounds like we're kind of an alignment. I know, Eli, you'd obviously like to see a lot more specifics. So
yeah, I think if we can come back to it, Judge, I think, you know, I'm on board with the recommendation to, you know, get alignment on the rest of the process, but I do think it's a key follow-up item. OPC is certainly going to be pushing, you know, for this April report to include recommendations regarding DER forecasting. How do we move forward with the specific lens towards eventually developing regulations to that end?
No, and that's, I mean, if that's the recommendation you guys want to make, and, you know, there's not an agreement on it, then it'll be included, you know, and if,
Great.
and if someone else wants to put in something else, that's fine too. So as long as we have clear options for the commission, I'm good with that. So.
Cool.
All
Thanks,
right.
Judge. Thanks,
Yes,
Jake.
sir. Yes, sir. I don't know that I really have anything else to add, at least on these two boxes and the comments that have been filed. Does anybody else have anything they want to follow up on?
Judge, I can just give you a real quick update on metrics
Great.
subgroup. So OPC has taken a first crack at a draft of a metrics straw proposal. Really, the idea is to highlight what metrics we believe are key in terms of things that need to be reported on within a modernized DSP process going forward. So we've delineated a handful of recommendations spanning across things like reliability, DERs, load management, and DER is kind of broken down by type in terms of solar metrics, EV metrics, demand response metrics, etc. So we've delineated all that. We've circulated a draft among those who've expressed interest in the subgroup. And I have requested for folks to let me know about times that might work for us to meet to discuss early in the next year. So far, it's looking like most folks are going to be around to discuss at a subgroup chat on January 11th. So
Excellent.
my hope is to have that subgroup meeting, and then depending on how that goes, there might be another iteration of this straw proposal, or maybe we'll figure out a way to try to kind of like overlay it onto the overarching Jade process. But we'll work together on next steps thereafter, and then happy to come back to this group as we continue to make progress.
Great. Now you referenced the 11th. I was hoping to have our next meeting on the 11th because I know we're missing out on the 4th because we have the technical conference.
Okay.
And I know you don't want to miss this, miss the 11th if we meet again. So I'll throw that out there. So I know you guys are well represented, and I don't want to exclude anyone from it. So
Judge, we could also we would be happy. I mean, ultimately up to you, of course. But if we wanted to do something where, just an idea on the 11th, if we had this work group meeting be 4 hours instead of the 5, and then in that hour 4 to 5, we have a subgroup meeting separately, I think that could work. In theory, that should work for everyone's schedules if folks already have the 11th flagged on their calendars. So yeah, that's an option. I'm happy to chat with you offline, Judge, if we want to talk.
No, that sounds fantastic to me.
Okay.
Sounds fantastic to me. Actually, there's yes, sir, Eric.
Good morning, everyone. Judge Eli, please, if we could push back on that date, right? I understand we already pushed for the 11th, but if there's conflicts and we can push back, there's any opportunity to push it back a few days, that would be greatly appreciated.
Any particular reason?
Eli, we got a lot going on, and we're just coming back from the New Year's and stuff, right? And if I break down where we are in our process in trying to prepare, we are really busy as a planning team. So I'm just asking if there's any flexibility, right, in trying to get the team to spread out these meetings and deliverables, that it would be greatly appreciated. I have to balance workload, Eli, and being in the work groups is not the only thing that the team does. It's the same team that is actually working the process right now, right? So this is not the only thing we do, and this is not the only work group that we're in also. So that you asked for a reason. I gave you a reason. Not sure if you consider that to be valid.
No, it's certainly valid. And I'm sure everybody on this call is not, or at least I hope no one is, their only job is dedicated to this work group. I know everybody else has things going on. You know, I've got other cases. I know PHI's got or Pepco's got a multi-year rate plan going on. So, you know, my fear is we push it, you know, that gives us a month, you know, almost a month to our next meeting. And given the, given just the time constraints we're under, and I know you'd like to have less meetings, but you know, if we push it, I think we're just going to end up having more meetings. We're going to be meeting every week. So, but I understand and appreciate your position, Eric. But you know, if we weren't losing the fourth, I'd be absolutely fine with it. But you know, that pushes us back to the 18th. And I think I picked Thursday because that's when the phase one work group met, and I think it seemed like it worked for everyone's schedule in terms of other work groups. You know, I don't want to cause conflict, scheduling conflict with that. I don't know if you have any feedback on that, Eli, but I think given the time constraints we're under, sir, I just don't see us being able to push a meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think for the general work group meetings, I totally agree with you, Judge. We really need to stay on track, as you know, we just talked about, Jacob and I. There's clearly a lot to get done before the utilities are even willing to go back and consider changes to the DER forecasting piece. So there's clearly a lot to be done. I think the general work group needs to stay on its cadence as much as possible. Guess I'm willing to entertain the idea of further pushing out the metrics subgroup piece, but the Exelon utilities did come up with the three proposed dates, January 5th, 8th, and 11th. And I think the 11th is the one that we're ultimately centering around. So if we can just use effectively an hour of this meeting that already exists, take it away from this specific meeting, have it be the subgroup meeting, I think that will be an effective approach. We sent around the metrics proposal to folks on December 15th. So January 11th gives close to a month for folks to digest, respond, you know,
We're
and
good.
develop
Eli.
comments. So it seems like a reasonable amount of time from my perspective.
Okay, we'll work with that. You know, just wanted to get the ask out there, right? Okay.
No problem, sir. All right. One thing I wanted to follow up on. Now, this is truly beating a dead horse. Grid management. Last time we spoke, we had, I think maybe 3 or 4 different versions, maybe 5 if you count the bulleted ones. What do we got? I mean, it seems like a kind of a minor issue to not agree on the definition or whatever grid planning. I'm sorry, that at least that was the latest iteration of it. I didn't see anything in your comments, Jacob, on grid management.
No,
I clearly don't want to add this to a work group.
That wasn't one we had gotten to on the condensed schedule for this week.
All right. All right. All right. I will add that, you know, I'll just add that, and I really don't want to talk about it really anymore, but I'm going to put all the definitions on one document, send it around to folks. I don't know if discussing it further is going to really make a difference, but if folks could just weigh in and we'll just go from there. I'll put in the different suggestions for that. The agenda, before I forget, the agenda for the technical conference should be coming out tomorrow, from what I understand. Should be posted in the docket. If you check it, great. I'm not sure when it's coming out. I will be out tomorrow traveling, but if I get a chance, I'll log on and see if I can find it. And if I can, I will shoot it around to everyone. And then I'm hoping that we'll have John Borkowski talk about interconnection work group on the 11th, as well as Fred Kelly. I know I've been promising them on Fred Kelly's on the 100% RPS study work group. So hopefully they'll be available and ready to go on the 11th. And then I think, I don't know that we need to, at least at this point in time, talk about blocks 3 and 4 anymore. I think we've done those to death. And then we've got the next 2 blocks are hosting capacity analysis / system assessment, and then grid needs and locational value assessment. Are those things that we can handle together? The only reason I say maybe handle them together is because DER and load forecasts were both in orange. These are both in green. So, but I obviously am not doing the comments or anything like that. And I don't know how big of an ask that is.
Yeah, I'll say for the utilities, I guess one clarifying question. I guess I do think they make sense to be, discussed together.
Okay.
But they are obviously similar to 3 and 4 large topics.
Okay.
Just for a clarification, then, for a meeting on the 11th, when would you be looking for comments to be filed on them by? Also recognizing the 4th, which would be the week before, will be the tech conference.
Right. I was going to get there. You're anticipating. I mean, it's really, you want to do them on the 3rd before the conference or the 5th after the conference? Because I imagine everybody's going to be, or not everybody, but anyone who's anyone is going to be at the conference. So again, I'm just kidding on that. I mean, if folks can get their comments in on the 4th, that's great. But again, given the timing, I don't want to mandate it.
Yeah, I know, given, I know from our team, many people are out next week as well. I think we can aim for the 5th,
Okay.
to have some initial comments there, but they may just be initial comments. We may have more thoughts that we may follow up with, just timing wise, recognizing working across the holidays, people in and out of the office over next week, and then leading into the tech conference.
Okay. So you're not willing to call people into the office for this?
I'd prefer not to. Certainly if there's commission orders, that's something, but
No, obviously kidding. No, I that's reasonable. That's more than reasonable. Samantha, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks. You just reminded me of another sort of logistical question I've had, which is, do you happen to know, Judge, whether there will be a virtual participation option for the technical conference?
I know there's been discussions about having some of the presenters present virtually. I don't know about virtual participation, but I can find out on that and get back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know that the agenda is coming out, and so I'm hoping I'm crossing my fingers that will be an option. Although I understand if it's not possible. I unfortunately assumed there would be, which you know what they say about assuming.
Yes, ma'am, I do. Okay. Eli, did you have a question, sir? Oh, okay. All right. All right. So why don't we plan on meeting on the 11th? Again, my apologies in advance. I'd love to be able to spread this out longer, but just given that April 30th time constraint, I don't think it's possible. Let's do boxes 5 and 6. It's hosting capacity and grid needs and locational value assessments. Shoot for comments on the 5th. And to the extent you can do reply comments in advance of the 11th, make those due on the 9th. That's a Tuesday. Yes, sir, Mr. Cathan.
Just a quick question on logistics. You mentioned that John Borkowski is going to be presenting at the next meeting. Remind me, what is he presenting on again?
The interconnection work group, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to kind of link it in that, one of the issues that are being addressed in the interconnection work group is the hosting capacity analysis.
Okay.
So if you could ask him, especially since the commission will be meeting on the 8th, as a second portion of that, the hearing on the phase 5, it'd be nice to at least have an update on where things are. I'm not sure if the commission will act by the end of that meeting or not, but let's find out.
Yes, sir. I can absolutely do that. All right. All right, anybody have anything else? All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, Judge, I'll need to wish everybody a happy holiday with hopefully a few days not thinking about DSP. But also, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I certainly feel, and I think maybe all of us do, that we appreciate your even-handed and often patient approach to leadership, and look forward to working with you in the coming year.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and same to everyone. I hope everyone has a happy and safe holiday and a great 2024. And it's doing the summary, I kind of feel okay about where we're going. I don't feel as bad, but again, I realize there's still a lot to do, and I don't know if we're creating more work for ourselves with all these subgroups, but hopefully they'll give us some decent recommendations. Again, if parties can't agree, that's fine, as long as we have something that makes sense for the commission to act on. I'm good with it. So with that, we're just over an hour, so it's not too bad for a holiday. So again, I hope you guys can start your holiday early, and take care, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks, Judge.
Happy holidays,
Thanks,
everyone.
Many thanks.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you much.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.